Thank you very much, Susan. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Hazel. It's a pleasure to be here at the Colloquium in these changed but still very interesting circumstances, and it's wonderful to be part of an international panel this morning. The work that I'm presenting is done jointly with a PhD student, now graduated from the University of Sydney, George Smirnis, and with Hazel, Isabella and Ben from the University of New South Wales. And importantly, in collaboration with our industry partners, Cbus, the superannuation fund that services mainly the building and construction sector in Australia. It's great to be able to present after Stefania and Gordon's discussion about planning, because this presentation is also about planning and indeed how we can help people, not necessarily the vulnerable, but people in general, to plan for retirement, even in the context of a compulsory contribution setting, such as we have operating in Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the support of the Australian Research Council for this work, and in particular, some of our partners at Cbus, Robbie Campo, John Sadawi and David Constable, who very patiently and generously gave us both their data and their time to run this project. So we are still thinking about helping people to plan and who is likely to plan and who is less likely to plan, as Gordon and Stefania introduced us to in a very international context. So now we're going to drive down into a fairly local context, but one that has generalizable results, I think, in many different jurisdictions. So as you know, around the world, we are mainly now members of defined contribution pension plans or superannuation funds. And it's typical of such funds to report to their members their current accumulations, their current balances. These are known with a reasonable degree of certainty at any date. They can easily translate into today's dollars, and they're a safe communication method for both the fund and for the members. However, if we're thinking about what that might mean for us in a decade or several decades' time, we confront the difficult task of translating that current balance via a compounding schedule into a retirement balance, assuming that we get reasonable investment returns. So we know that many people have difficulty with compounding time paths. So we've all had a very strong education in exponential growth over the past year, but we still think it's a challenging task to move from a current balance of, say, tens of thousands of dollars to something that's much more substantial in several decades' time. Not only that, what is adequate varies by individual. So what one person considers to be sufficient savings for retirement may be very different from what another does, even if they have similar balances at the moment and they're likely to contribute a similar compulsory amount over the coming years. We're interested in methods that help people adjust individually to their own situation, which, as we know as economists, is an ideal outcome and avoids the hotly contested question of making compulsion or extending compulsion. So in Australia, over the past year or so, there has been a great deal of discussion about whether scheduled increases to compulsory contributions to superannuation should go ahead. And this is a hotly contested question. What we're discussing this morning is perhaps a workaround to compulsion that where regulators encourage the funds to give people personalised projections and then support them in their response to those projections. What I'm showing you now is the formula that ASIC, the local regulator, devised to help the funds find a way to present projections to their members. This is a very simple projection method. It's based on a constant 3% net real interest rate from which fees are deducted and contributions are added. It builds up recursively using the assumption that what has happened in the past 12 months will continue until the member reaches retirement at the public pension eligibility age of 67. So it's building up on a previous balance. It grows that at a net interest rate around 3% with a small deduction for percentage fees. It assumes that my income in the current year and consequently my compulsory contributions will continue into the future, and that any additional contributions I make will also continue into the future, and that dollar fees are deducted in the same way. So using this recursive method, it projects a lump sum balance out to age 67, and from that final balance, it will then also calculate a 25-year income stream that amortises at the same real interest rate of 3% per annum, and importantly also assumes that the member can receive a 50% of a couple public pension based on their retirement assets. So we're very interested in understanding how members respond to this information, and we were fortunate to be able to work with Cbus, who conducted a projection trial during which subsets of members were sent these projections and subsets of members were not. So we're interested to know whether members are more motivated to communicate with the superannuation fund if they see both their current balance and this projection information. We're obviously interested to know whether it induces increases in voluntary contributions to the fund. And it's important to point out at this stage that we're looking at contributions in addition to the compulsory 9.9 or 9.5% as was operating at the time when the trial conducted. We're interested to know whether members who are observably different respond differently to the projection information, and importantly and particularly newly to the literature, we're interested to know how people respond in the second year that they get this projection information. The trial results that I'm presenting you this morning show the effects of a 2-year trial on one group of members. Now, Cbus is a profit for members industry fund that, as I said before, mainly services the construction sector. At the time we did the study in 2013 and 2014, the total accounts in the Cbus fund were around 700,000 accounts. And of these, Cbus identified slightly more than half that were potentially eligible to receive the projection information. Those that were not eligible there's a series of exclusion conditions relating to things like age, particular types of peculiar account activity, whether the fund could actually contact them effectively or not, etc. So around half the fund were potentially eligible to receive the projection trials. And the way that Cbus organised this was in 2013 to send projections to a relatively small group of potentially eligible accounts, around 19,000 in 2013. But then in 2014, they sent the projections to basically all eligible members. So the treatment group rose from 19,000 in 2013 to around 340,000 in 2014. And in order to conduct the trial in 2014, Cbus held out a group of about 20,000 eligible members and did not send them the projections. So you can see the challenge that the structure of the trial presented to us statistically, in the sense that in 2013 we have a very small treatment group, and in 2014 we have a very small control group, and vice versa. So we had to come up with a way of doing some matching that would allow us to conduct a reasonable test of the experiment. This page shows you the information that was sent to members, or a pro forma of the information that was sent to members in 2013. The important thing to notice here is that this particular page gives members considerable detail about how the estimates are conducted. On the facing page, the member's personal account balance is shown to them, and a projection, obviously without question marks, is also given to them based on the formula that I showed you on the previous slide. Then, in addition to this explanation of the estimate and some introductory information about their personal outcome, the Cbus also presented members with a series of calls to action. So on the other side of the projection communication, you can see again a projection of this member's account balance at age 67, rising from 25,000 to 198,000 over the course of several decades. In the box below, you can see that account balance of 198,000 translated into an amortised 25-year income stream, including half of the public age pension. So $24,800 per annum. And then in addition, Cbus invited members to contact the fund and then in box 4, there's a couple of suggestions about improving your in retirement outcomes by either increasing contributions or choosing different investment options for your plan. And Cbus gave this little example about Justin and how he was going to respond to the information that he was receiving. Justin didn't survive the cut. He didn't appear in the next round of communications that Cbus put forward. Their market research suggested that the membership of Cbus didn't think Justin was typical. So just to show you how we did the matching, as I said before, in 2013, we had a small treatment group of 19,000 and in 2014, a small control group. We were interested in covering, first of all, people who received the projections twice. So in order to do this, we made a match sample between those who received the projections in 2013 and those who were in the 20,000 control group for 2014. So the group in the beige oval received no projections in either year. The group in the green oval received projections in 2013 and in 2014. So 2 rounds of projections. And then we also matched a group of people from 2014 who received the projections in 2014 to the holdout sample in 2014. So we have 1 treatment group who received the projection twice, and 1 treatment group who received the projection once in 2014, and a group who never received projections at all. And we make comparisons between the 2 treatment groups and the control group that you can see there. So just to give you a little bit of sense of the people that we're looking at here, the Cbus sample are typical and atypical. The most atypical thing about the Cbus sample is that they are overwhelmingly male. More than 90% of the members of the fund are male, as is consistent with a fund that's servicing construction workers. And so that, of course, in the general Australian population of superannuation funds, the gender split is about 50-50. In terms of other characteristics, the median and mean age group are very similar to the population characteristics, and balances are slightly higher at the median and slightly lower at the mean in Cbus than they are for the general Australian population of superannuation fund members in this age group of 21 to 55. But you can see that account balance wise, these are not high balances at the average that we're dealing with here. So just to go straight to the results to give you some sense of what we are able to see, I'm going to show you several tables that result to contributions. There are 2 different types of additional contributions that you can make into an Australian superannuation fund. They're described in our system as concessional, which are tax-preferred contributions, and non-concessional, which are not tax-preferred contributions. In this table, you can see if we take the group that were treated twice, the control group matched to this treatment group, about 4.5% of this group made concessional contributions in 2014, and the treatment raised that proportion by 1.1% to 5.6% in 2014. So a substantially and statistically significantly larger number of treated members made concessional contributions in 2014 in response to the projection information. And that effect continued into 2015. So at the second round of projections, there was also a measurably larger number of treated members who made concessional contributions over the control group level of 5.3%. We found an increase in treated members in the control group who only received a projection in 2014, but that particular percentage is not statistically significant. In addition, those who did make concessional contributions made significantly more. So in 2013, the average concessional contribution of the control group was $144, and receiving the projection raised that by 83. We also saw a significantly larger projection a significantly larger concessional contribution made in 2015 by the control group, and also a significantly larger contribution made by the group who were only treated in 2014. So we do see an increase in voluntary savings in response to the projection information, and we see that that persists for 2 years. We also, I'm not going to put up the multivariate estimation, but we do also see that in general, older people are more likely to contribute, those with higher balances and those with shorter tenure in the fund. But in terms of heterogeneous treatment effects, they weren't terribly strong. And interestingly, the ones that we did identify showed that the treatment effect was stronger at lower balances and longer tenure, perhaps indicating that people who felt their situation was somewhat less secure were more likely to adjust their behaviour. So the table that I'm going to show you now gives a similar set of results, but for non-concessional or non-tax preferred contributions. The main thing to note here is that the theme is basically the same. Compared with the 7.7% of people who made non-concessional contributions in the control, the number in the treatment rose, but in each case here, the number is not statistically significant. However, the amounts are. So the people who received projections and who did actually make non-preferred extra contributions contributed a much larger average dollar amount than those who were not receiving the projection information. And that was true both of the group that were treated for 2 years and those that were treated for 1. Again, we find that these the amounts that were contributed were also higher at older ages, higher balances, and for shorter tenure, and were also higher for males, perhaps reflecting the fact that most males in the system have more financial resources than females. But interestingly, for those who are familiar with the Australian regulations, the actual likelihood of making non-concessional contributions is higher for those at older ages who are female with lower balances and longer tenure, which I think matches the fact that sometimes women are wanting to catch up in middle age by making non-tax preferred contributions into their account. We also found that the treatment effect was stronger at older ages. I'm now just going to turn to interactions. This slide gives you a fairly detailed description of the types of interactions that Cbus recorded, but I don't think there's a great deal of benefit in going into all the different categories. The important thing to realise is that they made a complete collection of all interactions of the members by email, phone and mail communication during the treatment period. Now, what we find here is that particularly in the first year when the projection trials were introduced, the effect on member interactions with the fund was particularly marked. So, for example, in 2013, among the control group, about 23% of people in the control group made at least one interaction with the fund. Among those who were treated, that rose by 13 percentage points over the control group. So a very much larger proportion of the treated group interacted with the fund, probably in response to receiving the projection information. And interestingly and intuitively, that drops off much less in the second year. So we do have a significantly higher number of people in the treatment group who communicated with the fund in the second year of the treatment, but it's much less marked than it was in the first year of the treatment. Similarly, we find a significantly higher number of people in the 2014 control who also contribute with the fund, interact with the fund. In terms of the number of interactions, there is significantly higher number of interactions among the treated members as well. So roughly speaking, going from around 1 interaction per year to around 2 interactions per year. Now, in relation to similarity and differences in the way that communication operated, it's unsurprising that we find that people who are older have higher balances and shorter tenures are more likely to interact with the fund. The number increases also at older ages, people for higher balances and shorter tenure. We also find that there's some evidence of an increase in the type of inquiries related to advice over more general inquiries. So it's possible that the projection pamphlet itself, which suggested to people that they take advice, was motivating a higher level of advice inquiries at the time. In relation to this, I'll just draw together the thoughts in relation to this experiment now. What we're seeing here from this trial is that reframing account information as projections increases member engagement. We have to remember that all that's happening here is that the fund is taking current balances and providing a very standard compounding projection. So in many ways, members had this information available to them already, and what they're receiving is a reframing, something of a boost in their understanding of their fund account. What we find is that Cbus members who are shown these projections increase their contributions on average and increase their interactions with the fund, and that the effects of these projections on higher contributions continued for the first 2 years of this trial, and were also effective for and significant for the group of people who are only treated in the second year. I'm going to skip through the next component of my presentation, which relates to an online experiment that we did that led to where we tested the components of these projections separately. I'd just like to make one point from this experiment, and that is that in the experiment, we tested whether the lump sum alone or the income stream projection alone were sufficient to motivate increased levels of contributions. And we found that the combination of those two pieces of information was significant in raising contributions over repeated choices. But individually, while they had a positive effect, they were not significant in raising those choices. So just to sum up here, in general, we find that reframing account information increases engagement and contributions, and this effect continues over 2 years. It's important to note that these are personalised projections that we're testing, compared with some of the more general literature in this area, which only test general information. We're able to test information that's directed at the specific member. Our supplementary online experimental work confirmed that this combination of projections is most effective. And while we don't see the entire balance sheet of the household, we can't say for sure that this is a net increase in retirement savings. What we can see is that this particular trial boosts people's engagement with their pension plans, with their retirement funds in particular. Thank you very much for your attention.